Hey everybody, this video is going to go over the PowerPoint in the Week 2 module on support and proofs. So how do you support a claim? We've learned what a claim is, that it's the assertion you are making, the statement you are making that you are trying to persuade your audience to agree with. So how do we get them to agree with it? How do you support that claim? That's what we're going to talk about in this video that goes along with that PowerPoint. How do you support a claim? Types of proof. Okay, so Aristotle, going back to how rhetoric and persuasion kind of started in ancient Greece, we're going back to Aristotle. He had three main categories of proofs: evidence, examples, and appeals. We're going to look at each one of those groups and some specific examples of each type of proof. Okay. So evidence is really exactly what it sounds like, what we would typically think of as evidence. It's support that already exists, almost like the hard truth, if you will. Things that can't easily be refuted or disagreed with. Evidence can be used at any point in an argument. It can be used supporting the main claim, and it can be used in supporting the sub-claims, your main points. But you have to do more than just give the evidence. You have to explain the relevance of the evidence. You have to explain how it connects to the claim and how it supports the claim, right? There are several types of evidence that you can often use in an argument: authorities, testimony, facts, and statistics. We're going to take a brief look at all four of those. So the first type of evidence you can use is authorities, experts who offer specialized knowledge on a certain topic. So the first thing that referring to authorities does is it gives credibility to your claim. It also illustrates possibly outside opposing views. So you could be referring to the authority to back up your stance, your perspective, excuse me. Or you could also be referring to authorities when you are explaining opposing points of view. You might refer to an authority to simply help explain a topic. You could also refer to an authority to give a sense of how popular culture or history has viewed your topic. But whatever the reason is for referring to an authority, be sure that you mention their credentials or what makes them an expert. You know, if you're giving a quote from an article, you'll give the citation in the essay, the part that comes in parentheses with the author's last name and the year of publication. And that lets your reader know that that information came from another source, that it's not your words, and it refers to the entry on the references page so that the reader can find all the source information in case they want to go read that source. But it doesn't, that's just for the citation purposes. That's just to make sure you're not plagiarizing and trying to pass something off as your own. And it gives the reader more information if they want to take it further. But it doesn't necessarily tell us why that person is an expert. So if possible, you need to let your reader know why this specific person or group of people should be seen as an authority, if you will, right? You can also use testimony as evidence. So a testimony is an eyewitness or firsthand account of something. It can be your own personal testimony, or it can be the testimony of someone else. It appeals to readers because it invites them into the world of the person who's giving the testimony. And if you think of like the courtroom, that's what we mean by testimony. And sometimes the people giving the testimony are experts, right? But not always. There are plenty of people that get called up to the stand to testify, to give their testimony, and they're not necessarily experts, but they have some useful verified information to provide, right? Be sure that if you're using testimony, that it's relevant, truly relevant to your topic and truly relevant to the point you're making at that point in the essay. And be sure that it furthers your argument in some way. When we're talking about all these different types of proofs that you can use, yes, they're there for you to use, but for all of them, you have to make sure that you're using them with purpose, okay? The third type of evidence that we can use are facts, right? Facts are agreed upon knowledge that don't really require further support in an argument. They are verified claims. Now, facts can be disputed. People could argue about them. But if you're using something that is truly universally accepted, then it really doesn't need any additional support. It kind of carries its own support. But again, make sure that it is relevant to that portion of your argument and that you explain how the facts back up your claim. And also keep in mind that just simply using facts alone might not be enough. You'd think it would be. If these are facts, then your argument should be pretty strong. But you still need more and different types of proofs to go along with your facts to help engage the reader and really kind of seal the deal. Statistics is the fourth type of evidence. Statistics, figures drawn from surveys and experiments and data analysis. And like all forms of evidence, you'd think that using statistics would be a surefire way of convincing your reader, but we know that numbers can be manipulated, that statistics can be used dishonestly. I don't really think that we would run into the problem of, one of us intentionally distorting statistics and using them dishonestly. It would probably be more that the source you got the statistics from could have manipulated them. And that's why it's so important to evaluate your sources and to have a critical eye when you're reading your sources, and to verify that they are credible. Because if you can verify that they're credible and you're sure that the numbers they're presenting are honest and verified, then you should be more confident in using them, and then your reader would be more confident in accepting them, right? The next category of proofs that Aristotle put forth are examples. So examples are specific occurrences of a phenomenon or some thing, some situation. Whenever we use a particular version of a point, we're using an example. And I think we probably use examples very frequently in traditional argument and in our everyday conversations where we're trying to make a point. We will use an example to help prove that point. Examples are really prevalent. There are 4 types of examples that are commonly used to support an argument: allusions, anecdotes, illustrations, and scenarios. So we're going to take a quick look at all 4 of those. So allusions are examples that refer to some form of public knowledge. It could be from history, from current events, from popular culture, religion, or literature. They add depth and meaning to an argument. And if you're referring to something, if you're using an example from something that the reader is already familiar with, it helps build that connection, and it helps them think about the argument in the world at large, because you're bringing in these outside moments, these outside examples that they can then connect, right? And then your specific argument will start to make more sense and start to be more relevant to them. So allusions are great ways of keeping your reader engaged with your argument and ensuring that they're following along and feeling connected to it. Another way that you can use examples is with anecdotes. So anecdotes might seem very similar to testimony, but testimony is more of an objective opinion. That doesn't make sense. I know it's objective and opinion, but it's an objective account of something. An anecdote is more like a story, right? So someone is sharing a short, brief account of something they have experienced. It will provide support for the argument because the audience is going to be drawn in a little more, and they're going to have a specific real life moment to attach to. It helps them see that the topic really does affect real people, if you will. But once again, make sure that any anecdote you use is specifically relevant to your argument. Don't share a story or provide an anecdote that is just going to get a reaction. Make sure that it furthers the point of your argument. Another type of example we can use is illustration. So that can be two different things. You can have an illustration with words, like descriptive language. So you're creating an image in the reader's mind with words. But an illustration can also be graphics. It could be charts and diagrams. And those can be very powerful in convincing a reader, right? Then we also have scenarios. So scenarios is very much like anecdotes in that you're providing a real brief story, if you will, except in this case, it's not real. It's hypothetical. You are asking the reader, imagine if this were to happen. It helps the reader envision an abstract point. You're trying to make it more concrete, except you don't have anyone that you know that has actually experienced it, but you know that the possibility is there. And there's probably someone out in the world who has experienced it. You just don't know them personally in order to share their story. So you're having the reader imagine this scenario. It can be pretty effective if done correctly. What you want to make sure you do, though, is let the reader know that it is hypothetical. Use language that would indicate that you are taking them into this fictional possibility, right? Don't let them think that it is something that has actually happened. So those are the four types of examples that are often used in argument. So we've had evidence and examples, and the third category of proofs are what we call appeals, or thoughtful persuasion. And this is when, it's in the absence of physical evidence, and using them instead of examples. It's creative thinking. Aristotle called them artistic proofs because you can't just look them up in a source, and you can't just ask someone what they've experienced. You are essentially creating the proof on your own. We're going to really take a look at these because they constitute most of what we know as arguments. So much of how persuasion is used comes from appeals. And there are three categories of appeals. There's ethos, which refers to authority, pathos, which refers to emotions, and logos, which refers to logic and reasoning. These three categories, these appeals, are so pervasive in argument. You're going to see throughout the quarter just how much they are used in persuasion. So the first category is ethos, authority. So the first thing that ethos does is it's about the audience's perception of you, as the arguer, their opinions, their judgments, their impressions. You want them to see you as an authority. You want to seem credible to the reader. How do you do that? How do you build your own credibility in just one essay, right? Well, you're using authorities in your essay, right? That's one of the types of proofs you're going to use, bringing in those sources, right? So you want to make sure that you are choosing sources who have strong reputations, good credentials, and that you are showing respect for character and experience. And you can think, who do you accept as an authority? Who would you, or what types of people would you believe if you were reading an essay and someone was quoting those authorities, right? We have an example here of a claim that uses ethos in its support. So the claim is California will have an earthquake. The support is professors and scientists say so. So we're expected to assume that the author of the claim, as well as the experts, the professors and scientists, are accurate. We are expected to assume that these people are fair, that they are reliable, that they are knowledgeable, and that they are experienced. And we're expected to believe that they have our best interests in mind, right? So we have to ask ourselves some questions. Is there enough information to establish the true character and experience of the author of the claim? Is the information complete and accurate? Is there enough information about the group that they're referring to believe what the author says about it? Are the credentials of the experts good enough to make their contribution to the claim reliable? Is the source reliable? So we have to ask ourselves those questions when we come across a claim supported by ethos, by authority. Is it true authority? Is it authority that we can accept? Is it authority that is credible? Has the author proven their credibility yet and their ability to use reliable sources? We have to ask ourselves those questions when we're the reader, and then when we're the author, when we're making our own argument, we're making sure that the audience can answer yes to those questions. We want the reader to feel confident in us and in the sources that we're using as authority. Okay. The next type of appeal is pathos, which refers to emotion. So it's used to appeal and arouse feelings in the audience, primarily done through the use of emotional language. We use examples, personal narratives, which would be like the scenarios or the anecdotes, and vivid descriptions. It's going to provoke really strong feelings in the audience. So for the arguer, it's going to lead to positions on issues and influences the tone of your writing. If you're trying to appeal to the emotions of your audience, to the emotions of your reader, the language you use and the tone you use is going to be very specific, right? And we're not saying that the entire essay is using pathos, is using emotional appeals, but just the sections where you are using emotional appeals, the tone is going to change. The tone is going to be very different than the rest of the essay. For readers, if you're the reader, if you're the audience, if the emotional appeal is successful, it's going to lead to stronger engagement with the issue. And that should seem pretty obvious. If you can get people's emotions involved, then that's half the battle. You've already got them hooked a little bit, So you have to be careful though when you're using pathos as an appeal. You have to make sure that it's appropriate and that the point in the argument you're using it that it's justified to use it there. You want it to strengthen the other types of proofs that you're using. You don't want to rely on those emotional appeals alone. It's not an appropriate place to like vent your feelings and frustrations or distract from the logical conclusion. You don't want to pull on emotional heartstrings so much because you don't have enough other support to convince your reader. All right. So pathos is divided into two subcategories, what we call value proofs and motivational proofs, right? So a value proof is literally what do people value? Kind of like our personal values, but more about our cultural values, because you are kind of assuming like a wider general audience when you're presenting an argument. So that audience out there, what are our cultural values? What are the values that you can safely assume that the majority of the audience are going to share? Things like fairness, honesty, loyalty, patriotism, courage, creativity, integrity, freedom, equality, those things, those abstract concepts that we value. If you can tap into those values in your support, then you have achieved some common ground with the audience. The other type of pathos you can use is motivational proofs. So this is what you want the audience to think they need or want. Because if you need or want something, more than likely you will then act upon those needs and wants. You will do something. So we're appealing to like our basic needs: food, drink, warmth, shelter, sex, but then security, belongingness, self-esteem, creativity. Our need for self-esteem, our desire for self-esteem, our desire for belongingness can cause us to act, right? They're motivating us. So value proofs, what we hold dear as a culture, as a society. Motivation, the things that get us to go out and do something, right? Nobody wants to go to work. Some of us do. But, but we're motivated to go do that thing, right? And you can use pathos, you can tap into those emotions and motivate people to do things that perhaps they wouldn't normally do. That could be good or bad, by the way. So we have an example of a value proof. So a claim that appeals to our values, right? The curriculum should be multicultural. That's our claim. The support we're using is because it will contribute to equality and acceptance. We are assuming that the reader values equality and acceptance. If the reader really doesn't care about equality or acceptance, then that support is not going to work on them. Be like, I don't really care about equality and acceptance, so give me another reason why the curriculum should be multicultural. However, a good number of your audience would care about equality and acceptance, or at least think they're supposed to care about equality and acceptance. So knowing that the curriculum would allow for equality and acceptance if it were multicultural, then they might start to side with you. They might start to be persuaded, right? But you have to ask, what are the values expressed in the argument? Do I share these values? If not, how do we differ? And what effect does that difference have on my acceptance of the claim? And then in reverse, when you are writing the argument, when you're writing your essay, if you use value proofs, you have to ask, can I be sure that my readers, that at least the majority of them, would also value these same things? Because if they don't, then I probably want to find another way to support my claim. right? The other type of pathos, remember the motivational proofs. So now we're going to use support that appeals to what people need or want. So the claim is you should support this candidate. Why? What's the support? Because this candidate can help you get job security and safe neighborhoods. Well, we are motivated to do something to ensure job security, and we are motivated to do something to ensure our safety, right? That's why it's a motivational proof. So you're assuming that everybody feels that way, that the majority of the audience does want job security and does want safety. So you then have to ask yourself, and this is where it gets a little tricky with motivational proofs. What am I supposed to need, want, or fear? You know, there's an emotional connection that's trying to happen here. They're trying to get me to feel a certain way. What is it that I'm supposed to need or want or fear? And then, do I really need it, want it, or fear it? And then, what am I supposed to do? What action am I supposed to take? And if I do that, will it really satisfy my needs and wants? I think the best example I can give you of this is advertising, right? We are motivated by self-esteem and belongingness, right? So you want to feel beautiful. So you need to get this specific mascara. That's what they're saying in the ad we're looking at or the commercial we're watching. This mascara will make me beautiful, will make me feel confident, make me feel like I can go out and tackle the world, right? So it's motivating me based on a need, a desire for acceptance and self-esteem. So they want me to go out and buy it, right? However, do I really want self-confidence and self-esteem? I think the answer is probably yes. We all would like that if we don't already have it. However, the tricky part is, will buying this mascara actually provide that for me? I know as I'm sitting here asking you this question, you're all saying, well, of course not. It's just mascara. That's not going to truly help with your self-esteem. Yet, how much money is the makeup industry, the cosmetics industry making, right? Still, to this day, as much as, women are empowered these days, and there's so many different kinds of standards of beauty and so much body positivity going on, the cosmetic industry is still making tons of money off of us. So it works. Those motivational proofs are so powerful. Advertising relies on them relentlessly. Political propaganda relies on them relentlessly. We are going to spend a lot of time looking at motivational proofs, right? So we have made it through ethos and pathos, the first two categories in Aristotle's appeals, thoughtful persuasion. The third type of appeal is logos, which refers to logic and reasoning. You'd think that this is what constitutes the majority of argument, and it definitely has a strong presence in most argument. Those appeals, though, when we're talking about popular argument, the appeals of pathos, emotions, those are used more. However, we're writing an argument in an academic setting, and we want to make sure we're relying more on logos, right? I would say if you want to kind of put them in order of importance, logos is definitely the one you want to use the most of. when supporting your claim. You also want a good dose of ethos, because you do want to prove your own credibility, and you do want to show that you're using credible sources to help back up your claim. And then, if appropriate, and if it really helps your argument, you can dip into the pathos. You can bring in some emotions. But logos is where it's at for us, okay? So we're using facts and reasons and opinions based on reality, factual information, accounts of actual events, past and present. We're going to look at common ways of thinking about and perceiving relationships among events and data in the real world. And we're going to offer those ideas a line of argument. We are going to use lines of reasoning, working through the steps of the logic to convince our readers. Okay. There are 7 common types of logical proofs. I have a slide in the PowerPoint that gives you an acronym for it, SICDADS, SICDADS. So sign, induction, cause, deduction, analogies, definition, and statistics. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time going through those. I think if you look through each of those 7 types of logical proofs, you will see how often they're used. You'll understand what each one is. And I'm not real concerned that oh, I'm using deduction here, or I'm using analogies here. I just need you to know that logic comes in many different forms, okay, and that it doesn't have to be the same thing every time. So we want to rely mostly on logic, though. We're going to be looking a lot at different types of arguments throughout the quarter. We're going to be looking at written arguments, and we're going to be looking at speeches. We're going to read the text of the speech, but it's something that was originally put out there as a speech. We're going to look at propaganda posters, and we're going to look at a lot of advertising. You will see ethos, pathos, and logos in a lot of these examples. And you will see where ethos comes in different ways. And you're going to see where pathos is used really heavily. And you're going to see where logic is used really heavily, because they are not often used heavily together. And if you think our cultural perception of emotion and logic, we do often feel like they are mutually exclusive. Like if you're being truly logical, there's no emotion involved. And if you're really hitting on those emotions, then logic is probably not near the picture. They can be used in conjunction, though. Don't get me wrong, they can. But we're going to be looking at specific forms of argument where one is relied on much more heavily than the other. So definitely familiarize yourself with those terms, right? Ethos, pathos, and logos. So we have 3 categories of proofs: evidence, examples, appeals. Evidence are those facts that could be disputed, but if you're using true facts, they're pretty much universally accepted, and you won't have to really prove them, right? You may have to go further in supporting the claim. The facts alone might not, seal the deal for you. You might have to start with some facts and then work into some other types of proofs. Then we have examples, right? So where you're pulling in specific occurrences to help explain or support the point you're trying to make at that moment. And then we have our appeals, thoughtful persuasion, where you have to sort of create it and figure out how to use it best to convince your reader. We have ethos, which is authority. That's the first type of appeal. Then we have pathos, emotion. That's the second type of appeal. and then we have logos, where you are constructing the line of reasoning to convince the reader. If you have any questions about any of the types of support and proofs I've looked at, let me know. But we will be working more with them throughout the quarter. So, it might seem a little out there right now, but once we start looking at specific arguments and how specific types of proofs are used, I think you're really going to start to understand them on a much deeper level. And then hopefully that means you'll be able to use them really well when it's time to finally write your argument towards the end of the quarter. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, you are free to move on to the next lesson in this module.